Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, let's get going. Well, I decided on a new hat today. I've got my climbing helmet on today.
Wow.
So, and the reason I decided, I was trying to think about like, what should I wear today, but also kind of at the point of the call, and you know, Jerry Wins joined us from Wharton, one of my good friends, and also thinkers. But we were talking about mindsets and you know, and kind of mental model shifts. And I was thinking back in my own, you know, kind of my own history on what always impressed me about kind of the, you know, the 4 minute mile moments in different sports. And one of the ones that blows me away is the, you know, the climbing of El Cap in Yosemite, right? So 1960, well, in 1959, Warren Harding climbed the first time. It took him 27 days. And he kind of went up and down the climb. And then the next really accomplished climbers, you know, Royal Robbins led the charge and was able to climb it in 7 days. And he pronounced that it'll never be climbed faster. So does anybody know how fast Tommy Caldwell and Alex Honnold climbed it in 2018? No, they climbed it in 1 hour and 58 minutes.
Wow.
So you know, you've got a situation where it took 7 days all day long, 24/7 to climb this thing, and 30 years later, I guess 40 years later, that some guys do it in essentially 1 hour and 58 minutes. So certainly there's definitely some, you know, physical prowess there and amazing talent, but it's also that mental shift, right? The mental block. And I think we face a lot of that here. So hey, we're going to talk about today, and Jerry's going to kick off and talk a little bit about, he's done a lot of work on that. Wrote a really cool new article on kind of how mental models relate to the crisis. But first, we're going to do a little breakout session like we did 2 times ago. And, you know, I don't know if you guys remember that, but essentially we're going to go through, hey, is Ray on the call? No, Ray's not on the call today. So I'll just introduce it. So I don't know, for those of you who were here a couple of times ago, essentially what's going to happen is we're going to randomly break out everybody to groups of 2. And the idea is just to meet somebody, and we kind of do this scenario of red, yellow, green. Talk about, okay, I'm feeling pretty good today, so that's my green, and you know, because it's a beautiful day outside. Yellow might be, I'm a little nervous for this call, and then red might be, you know, I'm trying to help my kids get through, you know, graduating high school, which has been a chore with COVID. So anyway, hey, are we ready to break out there, Brandon?
We are ready.
Okay, let's do it. All right, see you guys back in 5 minutes or so. Don't be scared, anybody. I know some people dropped off the call because they were fearful of this part of the program. This is all about having fun and just getting to know people. So,
John, are we allowed to discuss other things that are related to the question of the day, or just how we're feeling?
Yeah, just whatever you want to do. I mean, it's just a chance for people to get to know each other better, and you know, I'm just trying to build a little bit of a community here. So it's always a good way to get to know each other.
How much time do we get? Last time felt
I think
a little
we'll do like
short.
5 minutes total, so 2.5 and 2.5. So
okay, perfect.
Yeah, Brandon, you gotta
Here we go. Here we go.
All right, sounds good, guys. See you in a sec.
Oh.
Hey, how was that, everybody?
I love
Great.
those conversations.
That was fun.
Good.
Yeah, good. It was super great for me. I got to meet Charles over in France, and thanks, Charles, for taking the time. It was super great to kind of connect with somebody different for sure. So, and those of you who might have come late to the party, I hope you got to get in a room as well. But that was awesome. So, any feedback on that process? Anybody?
Keep it going.
Yeah,
Great
I
topic.
think it's a phenomenal icebreaker.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I love it.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too, man. I love it. I love that we have this kind of global community here. And hey, Janice, how are you? Nice to see you. This global community here, and we're cranking. Hey, so I want to introduce Jerry Wind, and Jerry is a really great. He's always been super inspiring to me. He's just not only an incredible thinker, but also so productive. Jerry, how many books have you written now? Like 30 or 20?
No, 26.
26,
Oh,
26,
oh.
only 26 books. So Jerry got me involved a few years ago at a project at Wharton, and when I was doing foils, and it was a really great collaboration. We're talking about doing something, but one of the things I loved about Jerry's work is that He wrote this book a few years ago, I think in 2005, right, Jerry? The Power of Impossible Thinking, Transform Your Business, the business of your life and the life of your business. And so I thought it'd be really fun to have Jerry kind of launch. And I know a couple of weeks ago, I put the link up in the chat. Jerry wrote an article called 10 Guidelines for Creating Opportunities in a Time of Crisis on knowledge. Somebody's got their, let's make sure we turn off our mics if you could. Thanks. So I wanted Jerry, I wanted you to spend some time. You and I have been talking for a long time about the power of open talent and the adoption issues. And I'd love for you just to talk to us about what you're seeing about mindsets and mental models in the perspective of what's happening now. Kind of this massive crisis, but then coming out of it, how do we need to really shift our mindsets and mental models? Jerry, you're on mute still.
Sorry about this. Thanks, John, for asking me to kind of start the discussion with your group. I'm completing a book on opportunities in times of crisis, which is really inspired by the Chinese characters of crisis, which is comprised of two characters, danger and opportunity. And my premise is that to create and capture opportunities, we have to change our mental models. And I thought I'll give you like a few quick examples. You're all familiar with them, but to think about the implication, what will happen to the current situation after the crisis, when we're going back to work. So consider the following. At a time, there are over 4 billion people that have been asked to stay at home, and most companies are having people work from home. After the crisis, going back to work, as we did before the crisis, is really crazy. Why not utilize the lessons we learned during the crisis and change the definition of work and the workplace? Think about another kind of situation. At a time, 90% of all classrooms are closed and all schools and universities switch to online education. After the crisis, going back to the old teaching mode is going to be totally crazy. So why not utilize the lessons we learned during the crisis and reimagine traditional education to try to incorporate in it the online capabilities, more innovative new approaches to flipped classrooms and others. Think about another example. All art museums and cultural institutions are basically closed. There are a few truly innovative ones like the Metropolitan Opera in New York, the Met, Getty, the Barnes Foundation, and others. They're really doing an amazing job in engaging their audiences and reaching new audiences. Imagine after the crisis, for museums to go back to traditional focus only on exhibition in the gallery is totally crazy. You know, kind of why won't they then try to develop integrated approach and try to think that it's as important not only to attract people to come to the galleries, but also to reach global audiences virtually. Think about the other example in terms of our social and business communication today is totally digital. You know, we're selling digitally, we're negotiating, we're having parties digitally, we're having virtual dinners and all this. After the crisis, to go back to the old approach of primarily dominant physical contact is totally crazy. Why won't we combine it? How do we start thinking about combining it? Think about the healthcare system that we have. We currently, we basically realize how unprepared our healthcare system and policies have been. So after the crisis, to go back to the old policies and approaches to public health and other vulnerable areas, especially such as the coming climate crisis and others, is going to be crazy. So why not kind of basically rethink our whole approach to national vulnerabilities and how to address them? So when you think about coming back to the point that John kind of started with in terms of what are the implications to the workforce and to the whole talent question and to the open innovation. So when you think about what's happening today, basically companies are used to operate with skeleton workforce. They lay off, tons of people, and primarily they're remaining people working from home. So what are the opportunities when you think about after the crisis to try to rethink the whole talent question? Why can't we use this as an opportunity to upgrade the quality of the talent? We know that the talent of the 21st century requires not only smart, talented people, but also people who can work effectively together with AI and other advances in technology. How many of the people you currently have in the organization really have the 21st century talents, opportunity to upgrade them? Most organizations still are primarily relying on hiring people. What about the advantages of open innovation? Some of the studies that John has done in terms of showing the 4x and 8x improvement in speed and cost if you're using open innovation. Why can't we rethink our whole talent strategy in terms of what do we do to try to upgrade them? What do we do to try to integrate in a talent strategy equal balance between in-house and out-house, basically the open innovation component here. Now, to do it requires courageous leadership. Requires leadership that's willing to make the decision, sometimes hard decision, and experiment with new approaches. So I was hoping that we can kind of spend the rest of the time here really discussing what are you doing to try to upgrade the talent, to try to create better balance with open innovation, and how do you expand the scope from just thinking about a company to start thinking about the network, and how do you become as a network orchestrator, which requires the same characteristics actually as you're using with open innovation to a leadership style that requires really a win-win type approach. So let me stop here, and hopefully we'll have a useful discussion and wonderful examples to show how you're using effectively open innovation and kind of rethinking the whole talent strategy of the organization.
Yeah, that's great, Jerry. Thanks. I love that idea that, really it's incumbent on the leadership to, shift the mindset and build new mental models in this time of crisis that can take us forward, and really based on all of the digital technology we use every day. So I kind of assembled a group of folks to talk today, just because some people read out after the question. But I'd love to start out with Kirsten Hammerberg from Sidley. Kirsten, you and I just met a few weeks ago, and I'm so impressed with your thinking and your ability to kind of synthesize lots of complicated stuff as a strategist. So I'd love for you to spend a couple minutes on, not only reacting to Jerry, but also think about, what are you hearing out there and what are you seeing and what ways forward in the context of mental models and mindsets.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Jerry, hard act to follow. So thank you so much. And I love the idea of the two characters of danger and opportunity, and think, framing, I'll talk a little bit about framing, but I think framing is so much of, giving people the courage to try things new, and it can be the same thing, but just how we see it. So very interesting, and interested to see the book. So I think for me, when I start thinking about, the mental models or mental shifts that may be required to support a more networked organization that adopts, open innovation, there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all model. We've talked a lot about that. I really feel that a lot of these mental shifts are cultural. So depending on the culture of the organization, we'll need to think about it in different ways. I also think that it's important to think about the mental models as it relates to different levels of an organization. So there's almost like the organizational culture, but then there's also the culture of leadership, the culture of teams, and the cultures of individuals. So almost being able to work through it and think at those levels is important as well. So all that to say is that it's complex and it is contextual, but there are some kind of overarching shifts that I've seen to be effective that I just wanted to share as well. So the first shift, I think, is this idea of moving from the unknown to the familiar. So this, I think, goes back to, Jerry, what you were saying about, danger. And so much of the time when we feel insecure, it's often just because we don't know. And it's interesting because there's so many people on this call that are so advanced in the world of open innovation and future of work. And we talk about it as though it's so obvious, but there's still within a lot of organizations based on these traditional hierarchies, it's not as familiar and people are still kind of grappling with the right way to use it. So shifting from kind of the unknown to the familiar, looking at ways to educate at a category level, not just at a platform level, so that it can really become part of a systemic strategy and not just kind of a side way of working. I think that that's, you know, an important thing to think about. Another shift that I see as being really important, and again, it goes back to this notion of positioning, is how do we shift away from this idea of open talent potentially being a threat to an enabler? And so much about kind of being successful as a networked business is understanding very clearly your role, kind of almost at all those different levels, and then using open innovation or open talent as a way to help organizations and help individuals accomplish what they do better versus saying that everything that you've known before needs to change. So again, really thinking about how to position it within the system and looking at it as a tool to advance people versus saying everything needs to get thrown out the window, I feel like is a successful strategy as well. And then the last thing quickly I wanted to talk about, and again, Jerry, it touches on what you spoke to as well, is this shift from a knowing organization to a learning organization. And the reason why this is so important is I think for so many people, we are where we are within our careers when we talk about traditional careers and corporate careers, because growth is very horizontal. It's about the more you know and the more expertise you bring to a conversation, kind of the further you advance. And within kind of the world of open innovation and open talent, it's more around the ability to work well with others versus knowing everything. And the ability to coexist, to not have to have an answer, to not always have to build on someone else, but just listen, is something that's not an instinct or a muscle that is really well developed within organizations. So I think that this is one of the biggest shifts and one of the hardest, but I think the most foundational.
That's really great. Thanks, Kirsten. I always love the way you can kind of synthesize and bring it to a higher level. And I love that idea of kind of knowledge organizations to learning organizations. I think that's when I've been in organizations like my experience at Avast, I really struggled with that, right? Especially being an old French organization, it was very much about like, you know, what you knew horizontally and what experiences you had together. And if you weren't in the right party at the right time, you just weren't included in the conversation. So thanks for that. Really appreciate it. Hey, we're going to turn to Gavin. Hey, Gavin from Subsea 7. Gavin's done some amazing things using open talent for the Subsea 7 organization. And I think, you know, your founding story about how you got going is so much about that kind of mental shift. So are you on the call?
Yeah. Hi, John. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, in terms of mindset shift, I mean, usually there's some kind of catalyst which causes the organization to question its existing model or to pivot to something else. And obviously, you know, each of us here are seeing so many different things happening across the world at the moment. But, you know, whether that's normally in a normal circumstance, whether that's something that relates to a global or a localized recession or a crisis of some kind, an industry downturn. And what I'd kind of seen in my own organization was that people, you know, it's a very traditional organization. People were very much focused on business improvement, and they'd reached a peak where they said, okay, we need to move beyond that. And, you know, that mindset isn't going to get us out of this situation. And it kind of goes back to the saying that Einstein, you know, he's famously quoted as saying something along the lines of, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that created them. So you get into this mindset where you say, okay, well, if I want to make a magnitude of improvement, then I need to embrace a philosophy that's around 10x and not 10%. Most people can optimize things by a few percent here and there. So you need to really kind of say, okay, well, I'm actually prepared to not be limited anymore by my capacity to dream in more than one dimension. And the reality is that whatever headcount, however many employees your organization has, your organization is just a small part of a world of over 7.8 billion people. So you need to be able to think of it differently. And Bill Joy, who founded Sun Microsystems, said something really controversial, many years ago. And he said, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. So there's a realization there that you want to be able to understand the challenges in your own organization. You want to be able to solve those, and you need to move beyond. So you need to be able to create an ecosystem to do that. And that takes quite a shift in mindset. One of the business lecturers at Harvard Business School said something a few years ago that really resonated with me. And he said, Kapoor said, no company is an island. So, no one can vertically integrate everything. Even Apple and Google rely on other companies and acquiring them and acquiring capabilities. So for most organizations, I think they're in a point where they need to understand there's a cost to doing nothing. There's a cost to standing still. And Peter Thiel said in his book, back in 2016, in a world that's changing so quickly, the greatest risk you can take is to take no risk at all. Someone asked Wayne Gretzky many years ago, what was the best advice that he ever got? And he said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So you need to be able to lean in. You need to be able to solve problems. You need to be able to embrace a mindset where you're not going to stand still, and you need to be able to move forward. And the recognition for me over the past few years has been that time has become our most precious currency. I was over visiting Boston a few years back for Hub Week, and I went into Harvard Business School, and I saw a really good quote on the wall, and it said, it was by Oliver Wendell Holmes, the former American justice. And bearing in mind, this is almost 160 years ago, he said, a mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimension. So once you get involved in open innovation and you start acquiring capabilities that are world leading and accessing insights on demand, you can't just go back to the old ways of working and forget about them. And when I went to Hub Week, I went to an event with Michael Hendricks from IDEO, and he said something that stuck with me. And he said, innovation will have to be disruptive to your culture first before it's ever disruptive to the market. And that's true. You need to put yourself in a place where your organizations can engage with and empower its own people and help them to be able to choose that path and support it. I don't know how many of you have read a book by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He wrote an amazing little book before he died, and it's called The Little Prince. And in that, he said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to gather the wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. So most people want to be creative. Most people want to move forward and solve problems together. You just need to give them the tools and the mechanisms to do so. For me, it's about being willing to lead and willing to lean in. And I think probably the one thing that really sticks with me, and I've been very fortunate in my life. I've seen a huge amount of the world. And the one thing that sticks with me is a quote from Proust. And he said, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And that's exactly what open innovation does, and open talent models. They create a mindset where you put a lens over and you can view the world differently, where you can get insights on demand, where you can be able to accelerate like never before. If I was to tell you, for example, that on average, I have solved problems that have been decades old by working with organizations and accessing solutions to those in under 12 weeks, being able to create, improvements which have exceeded 3,000x. Most people would laugh, but that's a reality. That's what we've been able to achieve. So happy to talk a bit more about it, but don't want to take up too much time. Thanks.
Hey, thanks so much, Gavin. I love that. The Little Prince is one of my favorite books. And I love kind of his perspective. And if you study his background, what a crazy adventurer he was. So I want to get Ava from 99 Designs, who's in Berlin right now. She and I have had Ava, you and I have had some great conversations lately, and you guys have been kind of the platforms that have been around for the longest. And I just love your perspective that, you guys are, as we did the other day, you guys are trying to reinvent some of the things you're doing and new mindsets about who you are and what you do. But how do you think about mindsets and mental model shifts in the context, not just 99 Design, but also in working with your clients?
Yeah, hey guys, thanks for having me. Yeah, I was just reflecting on what you guys are thinking in terms of mindset shifts we see in the greater world. And I think actually it became clear to me that even at 99, we had a big mindset shift in how we approach things and what is more on the danger side and what's opportunity side, because I started working with open creation platforms like over 10 years ago, and joined 99 Designs in 2012. And since then, I always had the dream of building an agency on top of the platform. And there was always reason why it was not the right time. We had to build the marketplace and everything. And when the COVID crisis hit, it feels like we all realized what we had in the past might change, right? Because you just do a design project if you want to kick something new off. And we have been bringing forward initiatives we have been talking about for 2 years or something like this. And I don't understand why it was able for us to do this now, right? It's in some ways, it's unlogical, but I think the amazing thing, what came out of it, that I could push forward on my project of kind of bridging the gap between working on just the marketplace platform and finding a way to connect more with traditional organizations who are now also wondering, they are all in this massive experiment of working remotely, what we never thought we would get to. And their creative teams, they might be limited in resources. And also I feel like the whole internet is becoming more democratic. So it's maybe less relevant where the person you work with, the open talent sits, right? Nobody is in the in-house team anymore. There are no water cooler talks, right? So I guess it's much easier to become part of a conversation. And anyway, so that I think the interesting learning we had when we started our new project, what we called 99 Select, where we offer created teams to corporations, where we try to bridge the gap that they are not afraid to find the freelancer they don't really know, they don't know the skill set, and but we become kind of the middleman. We create a group of designers, we train them on brand, and we find a way for them to expand their teams into the world of open talent. Anyway, I guess my take is, yeah, interesting that we move this forward now. And yeah, I guess my question for all of you would be, how do I approach these organizations who are currently in the situation of where do we move? They know they have to change something, right? And I guess we really want to help them with amazing designs and like a modern access to the world of designers who are also really in need of work.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I think, I think one of the things that I've seen is this kind of need for this kind of curation layer above, the platform. So, Abe, I applaud your ideas and your thinking. And I mean, I know Adam Sandlin, I don't know if Adam's on the call, but Adam and I've had lots of conversations. Adam's from Top Coder, and, this ability to help and teach organizations on how to culturally adopt new things. I think that's part of the kind of missing thing. And, Kirsten, back to you and Sidley, as you guys transform, it seems like there's a huge opportunity to think about, organization, not just marketing, but also from a perspective of kind of organizational, innovation, to think through some of these principles you talk about, between the really wonderful platforms that are being built and the organizations, and how do those organizations kind of have the courage to adopt things in a much more powerful way. So I love that. So thanks Ava for adding to that. Hey, I'm gonna shift things over to Mumbai with Mark Hannett. Mark sent me a really great note last night, and I thought it was a really great cultural perspective from India. So take it away.
Thank you, John.
Nice hat, by the way.
Thank you, man. So I had choices. If my plans had gone as they were meant to, I would have been in Nepal trekking at the moment. So the other option was to have a kind of fur-lined hat, but I went with the sombrero because I thought it might kind of brighten the day. So yeah, I'm speaking to you from Mumbai, where it's now 10 o'clock in the evening and the temperature has dropped to a mere 28 degrees centigrade or 80 Fahrenheit. And we're in day 50 of one of the harshest lockdowns on the planet. I thought I'd just pick up on Kirsten's comment about, not one size fits all, but also to think not just about organizational culture, but also about regional and national cultures. So I've spent the last 10 years in India, and one of the things that I've thought about and written about is the differences in sort of workplace cultures in different places. And my observation is this, that there are some places in the world which are much more ready and willing and equipped, if you like, to be able to make that move into the world of remote working, open talent, contingent resourcing. And there are some other places which I think are far less well prepared for that. And I put India in that category of being less well prepared. And I think it comes down to a couple of factors, one of which is that, in the West, in Western democracies, you've had this sort of series of economic and political and social evolutions, if not revolutions, over the past 100 years. And what that's led to is a point where you've got organizational structures which tend to be much flatter, they tend to be more flexible, they tend to already be a bit more open. Whereas what you've got in India is essentially, something which is not very far from being feudal, and it's hugely hierarchical. And the delta of change, if you like, that has to be undergone in India is really quite significant. And there is very little in terms of the sort of frameworks that would encourage or enable people to take that leap. And one of the things that's really interested me over the last 6 weeks is the way in which, India's IT companies, who, if you like, lead India's globalization footprint, have really struggled in this era of work from home because they're just not geared up for it. If you think about what call centers do, they essentially ship in large numbers of people to a particular location, and then they monitor them quite closely in order that they can then deliver a set of services to their clients in other parts of the world. But what they do, and they're the remote workers for everybody else, but they're really not geared up to being able to do that for themselves. They've massively struggled with that sort of making that mental shift, which is that you don't need to bring everybody here and that potentially all of those people can work from home. So I think, to Kirsten's point and to perhaps a point that Jerry made at the beginning, which is that, it is culturally, it's a cultural context that we need to think about, and that the delta of change in different places is going to be vastly different. It isn't a one size fits all.
That's a really good point. I think a lot of times we figure out kind of these massive trends and what they mean globally, but then kind of localizing them is a super important part. So thanks for adding to that, Mark. I really appreciate that. Hey, I want to introduce, and Jeff, you and I didn't talk beforehand, but I saw you on the screen, and so I think it's Jeff Davis. And Jeff, do you want to spend a couple minutes chatting? Do you have, I don't know if you want to, but let me just introduce Jeff. Jeff's one of my heroes in this movement. He's the guy that started everything at NASA. He figured out kind of like, what does it mean, in a financially constrained organization at the time to really use open talent. And I would propose that, COSI is kind of one of the real, gems of the whole movement, the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. So Jeff's been doing this for a long, long time. And I'm sure back when you started this thing, the mindsets and mental models inside NASA were really, really hard to overcome. And I'd love for you to share maybe 3 or 4 minutes on that. Thanks for being here.
Sure. Well, thanks, John. Yeah, when we got started, it was innocuous enough because it was one long experiment. And we were tapping into this new potential tool of open innovation. And I'd say a couple of things going from that experiment is the first is we thought the results would speak for themselves. And we'd acquired quite a number of very positive results using open innovation in fairly complex technical challenges in the space business. And we got a leadership team together. This is back in 2011. And we had 2 comments at the end. One was okay, we'll try this, but you need to give us a checklist of how to put it in place. And the second was, you're trying to outsource us. And we totally missed all that. And then there was a third underlying piece of that, which was for the researchers themselves, it was incredibly personally threatening to their careers, where they, the pushback we got is, we're NASA, we innovate. Why are we talking about this? Why are you even introducing this concept of open innovation? So as we move forward, we had to talk about changing the language. And this was, and I think Kirsten touched on this already, where this is a tool in the toolkit. This is for you. This is for you to leverage the capabilities in your lab. So we approached the R&D folks differently. And I think Kareem might have come up with the term in Harvard that the world is my lab instead of the lab is my world, to look at it differently, to get people to think outside. And this is actually expanding your capabilities. And then we approached the managers from the standpoint of, you can leverage your capabilities, you can stretch your budgets, you can, potentially do more with, as we were challenged to, with less. So it was really much less about the technical success and the capabilities, the platforms, and it was all about culture shift and culture change and trying to adopt that. I think Steve last week might have mentioned, Steve Rader might have mentioned that the open innovation platform within NASA, NASA at Work, is now getting tremendous traction, is embraced by the administrators. So I was talking with Lynn Bucco the other day, and we were joking it was a 10-year overnight success, to get to have this adoption within NASA. But it does take time. It takes persistence. It takes language. It takes education. One other quick comment, we tried to build this tool called a solution guide to help people compare open innovation to other normal, more traditional tools like grants and contracts, and limited success with that. But the idea was, you can put it on someone's desktop and people can play with the idea at their leisure. They don't have to be taught it. They don't have to go to a lecture. They don't have to come to a division meeting or something. And so I still think that's got some value, but that was tough to get off the ground.
Thanks, Jeff. That's really great. Jeff and his kind of partner in crime, Elizabeth, one of the time, they've taught me so much. And I was on a call. I don't think maybe you were on the call, Jeff, but I'm not sure. It was with, I think it was with Metalsa, the really great Mexican company that does undercarriages for cars. And I think it was Elizabeth said this great thing. She said, really things clicked at NASA when we stopped celebrating the solver and we started celebrating the person that had the courage inside the organization to actually, come up with the question. And that little pivot, right? Instead of saying, hey, Joe Smith on the TopTel platform solved this problem and he's the hero. It's really, who inside the company had the courage to say, I'm not a knowledge, I'm not going to rely on my own knowledge, but I'm going to go and learn and get somebody else involved. And that's kind of one of the most interesting things I've heard in the last couple of years.
Yeah, very true. And that did help quite a bit with recognition. And when we first ran the pilots out, it was so new within the federal government that the fellow who solved the solar flare challenge got press from the U.S. Chief Technology Officer, on and on and on. And the fellow who was the challenge owner within NASA got a certificate. And so, to your point, yeah, it was very upside down in terms of, recognition and acknowledgement of the risk they took.
Thanks, Jeff. That's really great. Hey, Sajeev, are you still on? Would love for you to you and I've had a series of conversations over the last couple of weeks, and you're doing such great work at Zurich, and I don't know if you have any insight into mindsets and mental models.
Sure. So I think the way we've gone about it, can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Excellent. So I think inside of Zurich, we have implemented, we worked with Topcoder, we've really implemented open access talent. We've been doing it for the last, I would say, 18 months. Going pretty well. It's been pretty bottom up in some ways, where we're a very federated organization, a very decentralized organization. And we've implemented the change through a number of crowdsourcing champions within each of our local countries or local business units. And they've pretty much taken the baton to make sure that they educate the businesses, the local businesses, and generate momentum on using open access talent. The one thing I would say to this community is really there is still a need for education of the users. So that's something that we should, as a group, as a collective, start looking at. How do we make sure that there is an understanding of what an open access talent landscape looks like? What are the categories that you could how is the landscape painted? What are the categories? How is this defined? Perhaps some sort of a maturity model in this particular space would help. Some metrics would help. So my call or my call to action to this community would be, please have a think about how we could better define that landscape, have a bit more in terms of metrics that would help organizations like ourselves adopt open access talent at much faster pace.
That's a great comment, Sajeev. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think a consistent language and an understanding of what the marketplace is really, really important in this process, for sure. Thank you so much for contributing. And I think you've got such a unique view of things because you're really at the tip of the spear of creating culture change inside a large organization. So really always appreciate your point of view on things. Hey, Chris Stanton from Harvard, you're out there doing research every week, and I'm always so impressed by how much you're getting done. Last call you said you were in the middle of a kind of a Zoom case study, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about kind of what Jerry was talking about on mindsets and mental models. But what are you thinking?
Well, I'm going to give you something that's a little bit more extemporaneous than what I had planned, because I think the call has really brought up some interesting ideas. And I guess what I had thought about talking about was more from the perspective of like organizational theory or whatever. But now, having listened to everyone on the call, kind of from Jerry on down, I think something really struck me in terms of, one, what the role of leadership is to nudge people to do things differently. And so if I can just share my screen, I'll kind of talk through a result from a paper that I just published that really changed the way that I was thinking about this. And so this is a figure from a paper that is called Workplace Knowledge Flows. And the paper is an experiment where we went into a sales call center and we tried 3 different treatments, but really just one is important. So one treatment was what we called pair incentives, which you can kind of see in the red here. And in this treatment, what we did was we took 2 salespeople in these call centers and we paired them together at random. And we said at the end of the week, this pair of 2 call center agents were going to compete against other groups of call center agents, and whoever improved their sales most relative to the baseline in weeks -2 to 0 here was just going to qualify for a prize that was about $50 a person. The second treatment, which we call structured meetings, was we just told these 2 people who were otherwise equivalent and got randomized into this other condition that they were going to have lunch with their partner twice a week, and they were going to talk through the issues that they were having with their sales. The third group, which is combined, got the monetary sort of prize incentive for winning versus other groups and those lunch meetings. And then we had 2 control groups that didn't get anything other than knowledge that they were paired together. And the thing that really struck me about this result was that if you look at the revenue per call, which is on the y-axis here, over time, this intervention was live for 4 weeks and then it ended. And so the people who got just some incentive alignment to work together reverted back to the groups that didn't have any of these changes. But the groups in green and yellow who were just told to sit down and talk through their problems with a partner had these long run persistent changes in their sales. And it looks like the the sales increase here 24 weeks after the start of that instruction totaled about 15%. Now, these are all people who are paid significantly on commission. And you probably would have thought that they would have gotten to a place where they were sharing information with one another, sharing knowledge in the workplace, because they all had individual incentives to try and learn best practices. But it took this little nudge from leadership to tell people to actually sit down and talk through their problems. And that nudge, I think, is a good metaphor for other things where people may not have been doing what we think were sort of frontier practices, or they may not have been realizing their full potential prior to a nudge to do things differently. And so in the case of these call center employees, when we surveyed them about what happened differently, many of them just said, you know, I never would have talked to the superstars who I was paired with to figure out what they were doing to sell. And the biggest gains that we found were people who were told to have lunch with a sales superstar, and then they adopted the things that they were doing that made it work. And so it was just this leadership nudge to tell people to learn the best practices that their coworkers were using that really led to an enormous increase in productivity relative to all of the other experiments that this firm had run to try and use monetary incentives to get things to work, and vice versa. And so if I could just take a step back from that result to reflect on what this might mean in terms of what the pandemic has done for us, you know, I think one of the things that many of us have probably heard is that Isaac Newton invented calculus when he was at his farm because of the plague in London that pushed him away from Cambridge and pushed him away from the city center, and that he became more innovative. I think that interpretation is probably wrong, because if you look at his notes from what he was working on at Trinity College beforehand, he had thought about the problems that he really cared about. But I think the pandemic kind of nudged him to pursue this and to work extraordinarily hard when he was in isolation, and really had him pursue his passions. And so I think that there's probably a lot of bottled up energy. And what we will end up seeing is that energy being released for people to pursue their passions because they can explore new areas or try to interact with leadership to pursue new ways of working. The last thing that I'm working on now is through sort of the lens of remote work. And in the last survey that we ran, it looks like about 40% of people are going to change their practices within the workplace to where those practices are more digitally oriented. And that 40% number is just staggering, because it means that 40% of people have discovered that there's a new way out there, and that they think that that new way is going to continue even after they can go back to an old way of working. And that raises the question of whether there were just fixed costs and they knew that this was a new way that they could have realized and they weren't just willing to pay those fixed costs, or whether this was sort of a surprise or sort of a shift in mindset after realizing that they could do it. And so I'll leave you with that, but I think that this has been a great call, and it's really touched on a number of things that I've been trying to think about. Every speaker I identified with in terms of some of the things that they were doing to try and frame some of these issues, and to try and frame some of where mindset shift and leadership plays into facilitating that.
One thing that I'd like to add, John, is I think this is also the time that you see, if you read Wall Street Journal or anything, the speed at which all of these changes, all of these mental models are being overcome is insane. I mean, there are case studies out there about how fast companies are moving. The two case studies that I'd love you to guys do some research on is the Trolls World Tour, which was only launched as a digital experience without going to the movies. They made as much money on that compared to the last one, which was launched in the movies. So, and how that is changing the way movies might be run in the future. But again, the consistent theme that I hear whenever I hear about change is, this is something that we always wanted to do. It's not necessarily that COVID is creating a set of new answers that they never thought about. It's giving them an environment for speed and a stimulus that I can get what I always wanted to do. So at least in my own company, when I'm trying to push for change, I try to go back to the fact that this is not a new change that we are asking you to do. This is something that we always wanted to do. And now there's a market environment that supports that, that new mental model.
That's awesome. Thanks, Balaji. I love that idea of like, you know, the pent up energy. I see it around here all the time, right? With especially with my wife, Emily, who works at the university as an athletic director. You know, her new lifestyle, she's getting more work done, but doing it in a new way. And she keeps saying that. It's like, I've always wanted to spend more time with my kids. I've always wanted to cook more, you know, do more baking. And it's really cool to see. I think, you know, one of the things that's difficult when we were talking about earlier was this idea that, yeah, it's awesome that it's changed so much, but yet it's for a lot of us, we're working a lot more. So it's given us freedom to do the things we've always wanted to do, but we don't have the right structure. Whereas, you know, we used to go into work and say, okay, I'm ready to work. And when I leave, I'm ready to do something else. And now everything's kind of blended together. My sense is all that, you know, that mindset's going to shift. And we'll create new mental models that allow us to kind of, you know, be able to have that better balance that I think so many of us are longing for. Hey, we're right at the time. I really want to tell everybody, you know, Jerry, thanks for kicking us off in a great way. It was such a great conversation. Kirsten, Ava, you know, Jeff, Sajid, let's see who else. Mark, Chris, great job. Really appreciate it. There's some people we didn't get to today, and I apologize for that. It's been kind of a, you know, what a crazy ride. Really appreciate you guys every week. This is the highlight of my week for sure. I learned so much, and I think that's, you know, when you're in the knowledge business, it's like there's nothing like a big, beautiful place to learn. You can sit down with a bunch of really smart people and do it together. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you guys. And let's do it again next week. Hey, look, I have a couple of things though before we go. Always looking for interesting ideas to talk about. So shoot me notes. Would love that. And also invite everybody, you know, who wants to be a part of the conversation. I think this is an important conversation. We're trying to build a new industry here and new ways to change the way work gets done. So, you know, love this dialogue, and again, shoot me any notes directly if you guys need anything from us, or if there's, you know, any connections I can make with some of the speakers that spoke today. So thanks again, and have a great week and a great weekend. See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, John.
everybody.